Okay, great. Okay. I'm gonna hit record too, and I'll do an intro. That'll give him time to. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So here we go. So, hey guys, welcome to everybody on Zoom and or on YouTube and on Rumble and Facebook. I'm trying to do something different today, and I'm hoping it works. But I have amazing guests with me tonight. I have with me Reena Kumarasingham. She's a world-renowned regression therapist, author, and consciousness researcher, and she's with Andy Tomlinson. He's a pioneering regression therapist, psychotherapist, author, and consciousness explorer. He's a former chartered psychologist. Andy has spent the last 2 decades mapping the landscape of the soul through his work in past life regression therapy. Together, they co authored the book Between Lives, a groundbreaking book exploring the intersection of past life regression, near death experiences, and the evolution of the soul. Together, they have compiled some of the most compelling case studies suggesting that consciousness not only survives death, but continues evolving through lifetimes. Today we'll deep into the connection between NDEs and past life regression, the purpose of reincarnation, what it means to birth a new earth, how to navigate spiritual awakening into a chaotic world, and what skeptics might be missing. Plus, Reena will share some of what she's discovered through her extensive regression work and why this book might be one of the most important reads of our time. And with all that said, I'd like to give him a big warm welcome to the show. Reena, Andy, thank you so much for coming on. How are you guys?
Good. Thank you so much for having us.
Hi, Rob. Thank you.
Sorry about the earlier thing. We were just trying to get the dogs in.
Oh yeah, it's totally okay. Yeah. Where does this start? Like, tell us how this all started for you guys, and like where the direction you wanted to go with this book, and the research you kind of put into it.
Okay, so I think in terms of, so there are two starts with this, yes. One is in terms of how we got involved in past life regression. I can tell you my story, and then Andy can tell you his story. And then how the whole book evolved is another start. So we'll tell you about that as well. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. So for me, I was born in Malaysia and I was raised a Hindu. So for me, past life regression was just a way of life. And it was like a fact of life. And so when I went to university, I did a degree in psychology, and but I graduated when I was about 21 years old, and I realized that I couldn't serve in that capacity at 21 years old because I hadn't had enough life experience. So I then did an MBA and I entered the corporate world. And I was doing public relations for the media industry. And when I got bored of doing public relations for the media industry, someone said to me, my mentor said to me, if you're bored doing public relations for the media industry, you might as well just get out of public relations altogether. And then I was in Singapore at that time. And then Andy Tomlinson was advertising his course, his Regression Academy, where he combines psychotherapeutic techniques with past life regression. And to me, that was a match made in heaven. And so I did the course, and that's where I met Andy. And then Andy married me and kidnapped me from tropical Singapore to the cold English weather. So he owes me.
And I never paid back the training fee either, so I'm in
debt.
Yeah, in debt twice.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Congratulations, and congratulations on the book. It seems amazing. And we already have questions from the audience. One of my moderators, Jason, wants to know, what is a between life regression? And I wanted to let you know, I have a little bit of experience in this. Like, I follow Richard Martini, who's another, I think he does between lives too, because I think he studied with, I'm trying to think of the guy who,
Dr. Michael Newton?
Yes, he did. He studied under Michael Newton, and he has this whole idea that we go to a skull between lives, like we once we are, like our soul leaves here, then like we transition, and he has reports of people going in between lives and going to like a skull. That's the best way I can put it. That's the way he kind of described it to me. I mean, did you guys get similar results? And maybe you guys could explain like what a between life regression is.
Okay. So a between life regression is a timeline between your last past life and your current life. So your between lives is somewhere up here. And people go to their between lives because, in therapy, because they want to find out more about their soul purpose, their soul mission, and their reason for being here in the current life. For some people, they do go back to a school, as it were. For some people, they go back to, what I would categorize as mission control, which is where they get their mission and why they come, why they're reincarnated on Earth. And for some people, they're just going back to like a soul group, and they're sharing all the soul lessons that they have actually gained from their lives that they have lived. So it's basically just in terms of a timeline, that the between lives is literally in between a last past life and the current life.
That's amazing.
Can I give a study to illustrate that? It's a lady from Canada approached me, and this is going back about 20 years ago. And bear in mind, about 20 years ago, this was still relatively new. It's become more widely used over the years. And her husband had died 6 months before, and she was having a lot of trouble coping with life. And she felt that a between life regression may help her in some way. So I took her into a past life, and how it works is that you take the client to the point where the heart stops beating in the past life, and then it's always asking very open questions, such as, what happens next, describe it in more detail, and so on. And it turned out that she was met by a spirit guide, and the spirit guide communicated to her, this is the third time it's happened now, isn't it? And what he meant was that in that past life, her husband had gone to war, he'd been killed, and she'd given up on life. And the spirit guide was explaining how certain people came into her life where she chose to make a different decision, she could have discovered that life went down a different path. Because in a way, when people give up on life, it's like a form of suicide. And of course, when that happens, the gift of a learning opportunity in the human body is lost. So it's the nearest thing you can think of that would be frowned on. So what happened is that she next reported making contact with her husband from the past life, and the souls, they started to discuss what had happened and start making plans for the next life. And in the end, they decided that they would have a life where she was a woman again, he was a man, he would die slightly younger, but they would both be quite independent. So they would have jobs so that she wasn't heavily dependent on him, so she would find it easier to get through his death. And what he wanted to learn was patience. So what she would do would be help him not rush into business ventures. So they were both there jointly to help each other. And when all of this came through and she was able to understand at a very deep, profound level what had happened, it helped her let go of the death of her husband, engage in life, and in a meaningful way, live the rest of her life.
That's amazing. I was going to ask you guys that this is amazing. In your regression work, like, have you ever encountered soul memories that contradict our historical timeline? Like, and if so, like, what do you make of that? Like,
yeah. So I've actually written another set of 3 books called Shrouded Truth, and it's basically about the biblical times. And so it all happened. Like I said, I grew up a Hindu. So, the only thing I knew about the Bible or biblical times or Christianity was Jesus and Christmas. That's it. And so one day I was regressing somebody because she came for therapeutic reasons. And when I asked her, where she was, described the situation that she was in, she basically said that she was James, the brother of Jesus. And so, my mind was thinking, oh, I didn't know Jesus had a brother. But again, I didn't care so much about the detail at that point because, I was working therapeutically with her. And then 8 other people came to me, all for various other reasons, therapeutic, or whether I was training them, they were students I was training, and they went into different biblical past lives. So I had Mary Magdalene, Paul, John the Baptist, like 8 other characters. And so basically the story that came out from their regressions was very, very different from the story that was shared by the Catholic Church or disseminated by the Catholic Church. But the interesting thing is all these 8 people, their stories kind of wove together into a nice cohesive, bigger arc, as it were. And then I did a lot of research to see if I could get academic research to back up the accounts of the people in regression. And I could find all this research. And so there are 3 books called Shrouded Truth, The Magdalene Lineage, and Divine Consciousness that came out of that.
That is fascinating. So what would you say? I mean, if you were to do like a brief synopsis real quick, what would you say the truth that you got was different from what that people have been told in the biblical? Because a lot of other people talk about this too. They talk about that Jesus was not what the way that the Bible portrays him, that
Yeah.
that he had a sister, that he had a wife, that he had a daughter, Sarah.
Yep.
It seems like the Christian church, and I don't want to go too off, but it seems like this is so interesting to me. It seems like the Christian church had like had an agenda in mind that they wanted to put forth, and and it seemed like and that you can see this with the way they ousted other religions, like with like the Druids and the Cathars and the Native Americans, and all throughout any land they conquered, it seemed like they made people conform to Christianity, and then an agenda followed, so
Yeah.
that's why I think it's important to get the real truth about what happened,
Yeah. So in the regressions that came out, one of the big things was that Jesus didn't die on the cross, that actually he was replaced, and James, who is the brother of Jesus, sort of replaced him. Jesus did have a wife. The wife was Mary Magdalene, and eventually, and he had a daughter and 2 sons. So the daughter was Sarah, or Tamar, as she identified herself in the regression, and then there was Jesus Jr. and another son. I didn't manage to regress. I couldn't find anyone who would, the Jesus Jr. or the other person never manifested in my circle of regressees. And then what happened was, because Jesus was still considered a criminal in Judea, Joseph, James, who is his brother, was actually Joseph of Arimathea. And so he sailed Jesus and Mary Magdalene out of Judea. And so Mary Magdalene landed in France, and she started to preach started to teach the ways of Jesus and her style in France. And the interesting thing is, I actually went to France, and there's a grotto or a cave in which she died in. It's still there, and they recognize this. And there's also a church where her remains are in France, in Saint-Bon. And this church has been recognized by the Catholic Church as the 3rd most important church after the St. Paul, and where Jesus passed away, supposedly got crucified. So, and then we found her sister as well in the regression. And in France, in a different region, there is a church with her sister's remains as well. So if you actually follow the regression and the story, and actually look, because we found all these churches and the cave in which Mary Magdalene died, it all kind of tied in together. And
wow.
so Jesus didn't die on the cross, but he did die eventually in Mary Magdalene's arms, and he died quite young. And so she just continued his teachings in France, and that was the basis of the Ketha, what the teachings of the Kethas. And then you come to Paul. So Paul, after Jesus left Judea, had the tough job of taking Jesus's teachings to Rome. So taking Jesus's teachings to Rome at that time is, and I'm not going to be political, but it's almost like putting Trump in a DNC or, Kamala Biden in an RNC. Do you know what I mean? Because there was a lot of backlash. So what Paul did was he had to change the story a little bit so that he could get a lot of the teachings out there, but he didn't get as much backlash. So, for example, he didn't introduce the fact that Jesus respected women in the ministry, because in the Roman times, women were not in any authority figures or any teaching capacity. So, and then he also had to compete with all the different, the multi-gods, where they believe in so many different gods. And he had to portray Jesus as a god, because if Jesus wasn't a god, then they wouldn't listen to the teachings. And so that's where he said Jesus died on the cross and he came back to life, basically. And that sort of, his story is in my third book, Divine Consciousness, about how he evolved the story and then how his predecessors evolved it even more.
Wow. And then do you also get into the Council of Nicaea as well? Like there's a rumor that, that supposedly like reincarnation was in the Bible. And this kind of, goes back on topic of the reincarnation that we were talking about in your book, because it seems like that they took that out, they omitted that out of the Bible at the Council of Nicaea. And amongst many other things, supposedly.
Yes, they did. I can't remember who proposed it in the council, but as a whole, they just removed it. So basically, that book or that gospel is out. But then a lot of these gospels have started to come out now, through the discoveries from Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls. So a lot of this information is coming out now. I didn't regress anyone into the Council of Nicaea. It was just research that I found.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you guys about the regression work, it's because this is like it's for some reason this is it's a hot topic in our community right now. Well, and I'm sure you've had to come across this, and I'd love to get your opinion on it. So, a lot of people think that our purpose here on Earth is that reincarnation is more. It's like sinister, right? And that they said that we're in a prison planet, and they say that we reincarnate because we're forced to, and they say the light is a trick. I had to get your opinion on this because but my whole goal is I don't challenge what anybody says when they come on here. I let them present their, whatever they want to present, and I have an open-minded outlook on everything. But I'd love to get your opinion on this because you guys have both of you actually, because you have so much experience in regressing people and what you think about this. It's like a conspiracy type topic,
Yeah, I'll take that. It's the theme that comes through everywhere is the whole purpose of reincarnation is to experience and grow. And free will is an important part of that. Because if you don't have free will, how can you possibly have experiences where you have choices? Now, sometimes it may be that the choice is very difficult, but there'll always be a choice that souls have. And when they're in the spirit realms, they have a choice whether to take the life that they're going to incarnate with, or they could have some free will involved with the type of life, whether it's a particularly difficult life or an easier life. It's a little bit like when you're incarnating. Do you want to incarnate where you're going to climb Everest, or are you going to climb a little hill nearby? And some souls really want to go for the whole thing, and that's their free will. And often they're given advice to say, look, that's going to be a little difficult. We really think you ought to start with smaller hills and work your way up. But it always comes through with free will. And I've not heard anything in the thousands of regressions I've had that anything other than free will comes through. So I'm talking about people's experiences rather than my own views or thoughts. Now, obviously people are entitled to their own views about things, just as all of us are. It's their free will. But there is a difference between a view and what people experience and what they say. And this is what a lot of our book is really about.
Yeah. That I love that. Yeah, it's so interesting. And Emily Howard in the audience says, I'm obsessed with all this. She says, I'm glad that they found a new set of regression books. So this is the audience is really liking this. So I'll get back to, so in this book, you guys really wanted to focus on the in-between lives. Like, so is that what is it up to us? We have free will whether we want to come back here or not. Like, and we ultimately decide in the end. Is that what? And yeah, maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Because I've had the between lives. I've experienced my own between lives, and I used to teach the between lives. And there is free will everywhere. But I want to also link it to near-death experiences, because our book sort of looks at how near-death experiences and between lives sort of give an understanding that consciousness does exist after death. And so, because I had a near-death experience, which is how this book came about, and I had it in 2020 when I actually contracted COVID quite badly. And in my experience, after because basically I was pulled out of my body, and it felt like I was on an ocean riptide. I was caught in an ocean riptide, and there was no control. And as I was being pulled out of my body, I was actually expanding. My consciousness was actually expanding. I could feel it. And I was dropping away, anything that I thought was immaterial. When I was in my body, these were quite important to me. But as I was pulled out, they became quite immaterial to me. And I felt this sense of peace and freedom, a sense of peace and freedom I've never felt before in my living self. And but the one thing that held me back was Andy, because I had COVID, and we had both decided that I was going to stay at home no matter what happened. And I got it quite early on. And this was when there was so much fear around it, that everyone who had COVID died, basically. That was the message that was going around the planet at that time. And we made, and Andy, and I said to Andy, I didn't want to go to the hospital because I didn't want to be isolated. I didn't want to be in a fluorescent room. I didn't want to be intubated. If something happened to me, I'd rather be at home. And so we agreed on that. And so as I was being pulled out, it was very unexpected. And I wanted to leave a note for Andy. And I wanted to thank him for caring for me, because he was the primary caregiver while I wasn't well. And I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault. And I wanted to say I love you, and it was my time to go. Basically, I wanted to leave him an explanation, because nobody knew this was happening to me except me at that time. And so I came to this crossroads where if I had gone left, I would have gone to this infinite space of just peace and freedom. And then there were these beings around, like light beings around me, and they said to me, shall we go now? And I said, can I please have 10 minutes? Because I want to write this note for Andy. And they said, no, you either go or you stay. And so I chose to come back. because I just couldn't bear the fact Andy coming down and seeing my lifeless body when it was so unexpected. And so even then, I had a choice whether I could live or whether I could leave, as it were. So, because of that, I just, free will is everywhere. And in that space, within our current world, 3D world, there is a lot of control. But outside this 3D world, when we transcend it, there's just free will.
I love that. Yeah, that's amazing. And what are some of the reported cases that you've got, like, from people who supposedly went between lives? Like, is it like a school, like they say, or like, could you give us like some examples, if you can think of any, like off top? I'd love to hear it. It's so interesting to me.
Sure. So in terms of between lives, I had a client who came because she was at a crossroad, and in her current life, and she had sold a big business, and she was about 50, and she wanted to know whether she was fulfilling her soul purpose, and whether she needed to do something different now that she had sold her business, and she had received quite a lot of money, so she had the freedom to do whatever she needed to do. And so when we did her between lives, it was so interesting because her last past life, she was a coal miner and she died in a coal mine. And when we transcended and we went to the space where she was talking to her spirit guides, reviewing her last past life, they said one of her missions, her soul mission, was to build planets. And so she had already, she had a few lives where she had to work with the earth, like deep into the earth, because she needed to learn about, geology and, earth, like, dirt and earth and, the basic building blocks of a planet. But they said that in this life, she has moved to a different team. And so the team is, how to populate this new planet. So her life this time is to sit and observe animals. And so I was asking, because I was facilitating, and I asked, what sort of animals? And they said, forest animals, like garden animals, forest animals in England. And then I said, okay, just in England, she doesn't have to go anywhere else. And they said, nope, just in England. Because apparently then she takes all this information as though Earth is the school, and then she downloads it to her team, her mission team, so that they can go and build their planets. So that's like an example I have of, somebody, like a between lives thing. Another, there's so many examples out there as well of how people are learning life lessons on Earth. So, for example, I had a client who is currently in a very abusive situation. And when she wanted to go through her between lives, she had split from her husband, so she was ready to go into her between lives. And, what came through with her between lives is she's part of a soul group that's learning different aspects of love. And when we learn different aspects of love, we are also learning this, aspects of not having love at the same time. So you sort of, you get a whole breadth of it. And when they've learned about this love and they have this deep understanding and knowledge about love, which they then share with the soul group, it's almost like the entire soul group will evolve, with all this knowledge that they have received through their experiences.
Wow, that's amazing. One thing I'm going to ask you guys is, you guys speak of consciousness evolving through lifetimes. What's the mechanism or catalyst for the growth in your view? Is it experience, suffering, love, or choice? Or maybe something else that I didn't mention?
Well, that's the only thing that people do take when they die that lasts is the experience. That's the most important thing, because although when they die, they obviously leave the physical body behind, they do take the emotions, But unresolved emotions are things that souls choose to work on. So, for example, if someone died of powerlessness, they'll probably want to work on powerlessness in the next life. But it's just the experiences that they get in each lifetime. And just as Reena was talking about, sometimes souls choose to have the opposite until they've mastered that particular part, or at least their soul group have, and then they'll move on to something else. So it's very similar in a way to, I suppose the analogy would be a classroom at school, where people take their exams, their midterms and the end of term exams, which for humans would be the reincarnation. And if they don't get through it, they have to go back and resit it. And when they get through it, they go to the next grade and work on something new. So there's no speed about it. There's no right or wrong, because time is no meaningful. Time has only got a sense of meaning while we're in a human body, because we've got birth and a death. But as far as soul's concerned, then they can transcend as many incarnations as they wish. But most souls are really eager to learn, eager to perhaps often take on too much, and sometimes get into really difficult life situations where they were probably advised not to, if you like to use the analogy, come down and want to climb Everest, when they perhaps should have done it over 2 or 3 lifetimes to build up their skills. But it's no right or wrong, it's whatever souls choose to do.
And I think that evolution of consciousness comes from the wisdom of their, of what they've learned from their experiences.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It makes me think like do the people, I guess, in our lives like matter, I guess, as far as like the people we meet and interact with, and have experiences with. I'll just give you an example. Like my ex-girlfriend, I broke up with her like 2 years now, and I bring her up sometimes because we had an insanely strong connection, like we were like. And then we found out why. We did regressions. Like my friend Maya, she's also a regression therapist, and she did one on me, and then she did one on my ex Nikki, and we both regressed to a time back in Egypt where we lived in Egypt, and we saw each other there. Like I saw her in my regression, and she saw me in my regression, and supposedly we lived this life in Egypt. But then the relationship kind of fizzled out, and it didn't work in this life. So it makes me wonder, are certain people brought into our lives for certain things, to fulfill experiences for our soul's growth, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, in between lives, there is a section called Meeting of Soul Groups. And then when we meet the soul groups, people develop soul contracts with one another. And when they develop these soul contracts, they actually determine between themselves within the soul group, are you going to come as a perpetrator? Are you going to come as a friend? Are you going to come as a loved one? Are you going to come as a support mechanism, as people are going through their lives? And it's interesting because in the between lives space, there is no judgment of perpetrator or victim, because, it's learning two sides of the same coin, as it were. So if someone is, say, abusing somebody, there is no love, and then there is, fear or whatever is the underlying emotion of the abuse. And so when there is a passing, although it's very painful and very difficult when you are incarnated, but when your consciousness leaves and they meet again, they actually find out that it was a plan, and that, they were helping each other learn aspects of their life lessons, as it were. And so when clients actually get that insight, and it sort of is absorbed into their bodies, after a session, they don't necessarily forgive the perpetrator in this life, because it can be really difficult. But, it's changed their mindset of how to, perceive it, so they can move forward in their lives with this particular bit of wisdom. And I can tell you something that was really interesting. When I learned between lives, with the academy, there was a husband and wife from Sweden who were in my batch, and we broke up in pairs to do each other's between lives, and they went off with 2 other therapists, and at the same time they both experienced their between lives. And it was so interesting because when they came back and shared it, they both found out without talking to each other, that they were brother and sister during the World War II, and they both died in a concentration camp, in a gas chamber in World War II. And, they had planned to reincarnate together and meet as husband and wife to continue and finish off, their contract that they couldn't finish, because of World War II.
Wow, that's fascinating. And then I wanted to ask you guys about the soul. How would you define the soul versus consciousness, or what we think of consciousness? Are they distinct entities or different aspects of the same thing, would you say?
Yeah, so the thing is, if we break down, the way I like to talk about this is to break matter down. So, quantum science has basically broken every bit of matter down to so far the smallest particle. And what they have found is that, it's energy vibrating so fast it looks like string, which is, a very simple way to define the string theory. And so every part of us is made of this energy, the strings. And so I'd like to use the metaphor of water. So when there's a densely packed strings, quite a lot of densely packed strings, it's like ice. But then when water melts and it becomes less dense, it becomes water. And then, as water evaporates, it's even, it just is spread out, and there are not so many particles, not so many bits of energy that looks like string, and that's gas. So for me, our physical body is like ice. Our mental and emotional body is like water, and our soul is like gas, because every single part of us has consciousness. And so what we tap into a lot in this 3D world is our physical bodies, our mental and emotional bodies, and not so much our soul consciousness. But when we let go of our physical body, like, the experience that I had when I had my near-death experience, I tapped into my soul consciousness, which is a lot more subtle, a lot more quiet. And that's the bit that survives after our physical consciousness sort of expires on this earth.
Wow, that's amazing. And then I kind of wanted to get a little bit into near-death experiences a little bit. You've compared near-death experiences with between life regressions. What would you say the most compelling similarities that suggest the continuation of like consciousness after death, if you had to say?
Yeah, well, the research that we did was to take the research with near-death experiences that had been done by 3 of the leading pioneers in this area who'd published articles and written books on the subject, and they had questionnaires which they'd got feedback from the people who had near-death experience about the actual events that occurred. And the people that we chose were Peter Fenwick, Pim Van Lovell, and Bruce Grayson. And of those, there was about 450 near-death experiences that had material we could use. And in the academy, we've been teaching between life regression now for just under 20 years. Through the students, when they submit case studies for their qualification, have to submit 5 case studies with different clients. And there's a questionnaire they have to fill in, which is very similar to the questionnaire that the near-death experience is used. So we took about 537 or something like that of the questionnaires, and we analysed them, and then we compared each of the elements for the first few stages, because obviously with a life between life, it goes all the way from the death point to the birth in the next life. But the near-death experience only goes partway through, and then they come back. So we could only compare the first part of the between life regression with the near-death experience. So we covered the same stages, and there was about 15 different elements within those stages we compared, and there was a complete match, which indicated that entirely different processes. One was an unplanned near-death experience, often in a life-threatening situation, with a between-life regression, which was planned. Clients go into very deep hypnosis, and then they're guided through by very careful questioning by the therapist. So the afterlife experience was totally consistent with those two parts. And this is quite significant because the amount of effort that's been put into near-death experiences, particularly in the medical world, has just about handled all these skeptical comments, which really didn't hold water. So it's become pretty well established. And now that we've been able to compare that with the between-life regression, this is very, very compelling evidence of what actually happens between lives.
That's fascinating. We had a really good question from the audience. This is from Jason again, and this is an amazing question. I think you guys will find this interesting. He wants to know what you guys think is the deal with ghosts, like, or spirits. We could call them spirits, because we know they're very real, right? And like, even we can have even negative energies sometimes, like but like, why do people get trapped here sometimes on Earth? Not, or maybe not trapped. Maybe some people don't choose to reincarnate right away, and they become a ghost or a spirit, or I mean, like, I've heard a lot of times that the people that don't want to move on or go to the light or whatever, that they want to like watch over their family or something, they'll become a ghost to like, make sure their family's affairs are all taken care of, or kind of watch over them. Would you agree with that, or what do you think is going on with the whole spirit ghost thing?
Yeah, well, here again, free will comes in, and just because someone has physically died doesn't mean to say that the free will disappears, and it doesn't. So the consciousness that survives death has the choice of either continuing on its journey, which is really well documented in all of the between life cases. And one of the first events is to remove all the emotional energy that was carried from that life. The memory is still retained, but the dense energy that may have been associated with the death is removed. And then they go on and meet soul groups and some of the other things we've been discussing before. But sometimes souls choose to remain earthbound. I mean, it could be an accident. They don't actually realize they're dead. I had a case once where a young boy who was psychic, when they moved into a new house, wouldn't go into the kitchen. And when I got there, I discovered that there was a Roman that apparently where this house was used to be a site where the Romans used to have a camp. He'd been killed on guard duty, didn't realize he was dead, and he was still marching backwards and forwards, and the route happened to go straight through the kitchen. So all I had to say to the ghost in that case is that, this isn't your rightful place, it's the light, just look upwards and go. And he went, and that young boy then was able to go into the kitchen because he could feel it was totally different. But there can be other reasons. It could be, for example, a baby that's had a miscarriage or an abortion. Maybe the mother doesn't want that baby to go. or the baby wants to try to stay there to give it comfort. So there can be a variety of reasons why souls choose to remain earthbound. Sometimes it could be someone who's had a very materialistic life and they're just a bit frightened of what can happen to them. You know, they've read things about hell and damnation or things like that, and they think, I'll try to stay here. So there could be a variety of reasons of why it happens. And if that consciousness hangs around buildings, we call it a ghost, and sometimes it can attach to people, and in that case it's called a spirit attachment, and it can have negative effects on the person because the consciousness is still carrying the unresolved emotions from the death point, and that mingles with the host's emotions. So it can cause voices in the head, strange behaviors, and but it's very easily moved and cleared in a very caring way if people are trained professionally how to do it.
Wow, that's fascinating. That is so interesting. Like, one thing I wanted to move on to was you guys talk about birthing the new Earth, and what does this mean? Would you say this is like a literal dimensional shift, or is this symbolic of like inner transformation?
We would say it's a bit of both, because right now there is a dimensional shift, as in the Earth is being bombarded by a lot of high vibration energy, and astrologically as well, according to the Western astrology, you know, we are moving from one age to another. We're moving from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. And if we actually look at all these different ages, so when we move from the age of Taurus to the age of Aries, Moses came along and introduced the whole concept of the one God. And then when we move from the age of Aries to the age of Pisces, which is the age, you know, just, you know, the age that we had just come through, Jesus came along and he introduced the whole concept of a loving God versus a judgmental God. And then now we're moving from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. And so there's going to be another shift in consciousness. And if you look at the Vedic astrology as well, which is the Hindu astrology, you know, the Vedic astrologers are saying that we're now, you know, there are actually 4 stages in Vedic astrology. You've got the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Iron Age, and the Dark Ages. And we are currently now in the Dark Ages, and we are actually moving up. The Vedic astrologers are not quite agreeing whether we're moving up to the Golden Age or we're moving up to the Iron Age. But what they do agree on is that there is a shift in consciousness towards a better consciousness, as it were, because the Dark Age is really the most dense place you can be in. And you know, the Vedic astrology cycle, we sort of cycle through all these different ages, you know, over like over millions of years. And so because we're also so astrologically supported and we are bombarded by such high vibration energies, what's happening is, you know, our vibration is moving from this frequency to about this frequency. So our frequency of the Earth is shifting. And when the frequency of the Earth shifts, everything is agitated. So it's almost like, you know, if you take a carpet and you're dusting it and you're shaking it, all the rubbish and all the dust and all the mites and, you know, everything will be, you know, pushed up, will come up to the surface. And this is what we're seeing a lot during this time, when we're seeing a lot of polarity and you know, high chaos, high drama out there. That's just part of the shift, because everyone is supremely agitated. All our emotional bodies, our mental bodies, everything is agitated, and it just has to be expressed. It's all coming out. And the reason for this is so that we can see what works, what doesn't work, and we can shift our own consciousness to be in line with the higher frequencies of the Earth, because our current consciousness is not in line with the new frequencies of the Earth. And so there's a dissonance, there'll be a discomfort. But if we can let it go, and if we can shift our frequency to match that of the new Earth frequency, then we will find that we will be almost like, birthing a new age where there is, where we can create a world that is more in resonance with our new frequencies.
Yeah. Speaking of which, you made me think of a really good question. A lot of people talk about Atlantis and Lemuria, and if not those, then Egypt. A lot of people think that, a lot of us that are here now had lives in Egypt. I think I definitely had a life in Egypt, but some people think they've had lives in like Atlantis or Lemuria, and they think that a lot of us have reincarnated at this time for this shift. Like, do you think that's something that's possible?
I think because if we actually look at the between lives clients, we actually find that there are a lot more client souls who have been incarnated at this time that are actually here on missions. And these are high vibration souls who are here on a mission to help with this shift in consciousness. And you are right, there were times in Lemuria and Atlantis when there was almost like an abuse of the high, the energies, the high frequency energies or technology, which is why, when they were no longer in attune with the frequency of the earth, there were the big floods that came and sort of, cleansed everything, as it were. And so, this is another opportunity to shift with the frequency of the earth. And so we're finding in between lives all these high vibration souls coming to help us.
One thing, I had my friend Sean Bond on last night, and he's him and his girlfriend, they're living in Mexico, and they're finding a lot of like, the only thing I can say is they're like ET artifacts, and they look very real, and they're finding them, they're digging them up from the dirt, in Mexico, which I find interesting. I find like, maybe there was a civilization that once like, had aliens or something in it. I know it sounds, or maybe ETs were more prominent in our civilizations. I feel like if these people were making like, artifacts about it, then maybe they had some kind of influence in our reality. So I wanted to ask you, do you feel like that, or did you ever have anybody that regressed to a civilization where there was like ET influence, or anybody that ever like went off planet or anything like that?
Yes, I think it's nothing that's come up spontaneously. It's when the intention was to go to another life on another planet where the information came up, and then we were able to work. But the work I was doing at the time was therapeutic, so it didn't really matter which past life someone went into. It's bringing up the knowledge of it and enabling the person to go through and transform it. But we do get a lot of people who come, and Reena was talking about high vibrational souls that are coming. Quite a lot of those have come from other planetary systems. They've not been going through the Earth reincarnation cycle. They've been on reincarnation cycles in other planets, but they've chosen to come down here
in a human body
to actually help us, because it's all hands to the pumps to do this big shift. It's an enormous thing. And the thing that's making it so difficult is the old methods of control, of fear, and the way that the media and the institutions have established, and also the cultural upbringing of people. It's almost like we're in chains, and to actually break out of those chains is really difficult. And that's one of the reasons that we wrote the book that we have, is we've given quite a lot of tools to help people break off some of these chains that are holding them back, so that instead of the chains holding the frequency quite low, when they get rid of the chains, their frequencies can start to vibrate at a high level in tune with the planet. And as Reena was saying, the vibrations that are coming in are amplifying everything. So if we're still living in the old way of doing things and with fear or shame, the new energy is coming in and amplifying that. And that's making things even harder for us to live. But as we let go of all of that and we move into the higher vibrations of love and joy, guess what? Those are the emotions that get amplified. So we'll feel even more joy and even more love in our lives. So it's almost like the duality between where we've come from and where we can go to if we choose is becoming more and more extreme.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I was going to ask you guys, the last question I have for you is if you could distill your entire body of work into one truth that everyone needs to hear right now, what would it be?
Is that, you know what it is, and I will say it is not just from the body of work, but from my own near-death experience, is that peace and freedom, that enormous peace and freedom, can actually be achieved while we're in our physical bodies. And the things that hold us in our physical bodies are things like belief systems and cultural conditioning. And, if we are, like Andy says, chained to it, and if we keep our minds closed to, what we believe, then, it's going to be a lot more difficult to break those chains and achieve that peace, that sense of peace and freedom. But, if we can actually have an open mind, if we can actually listen to other people, if we can actually expand our wisdom to more than just what's on this 3D earth, then I think there is to achieve this peace and freedom is going to be that much more achievable, as it were.
Yeah, and I would just add to that everybody that's down here as souls have chosen to come down here to go through this amazing experience that only happens once every 26,000 years in terms of the big shift that we're in now. So it's a very rare event. Everybody has within them everything that they need to bring about the change Reena was talking about. But it's free will. They have to choose that that's what they want, as opposed to stay where they are. So it's possible for everybody to go through this shift that Reena's talked about.
Should they wish to.
Should they wish to. And it's not right or wrong, it's not a judgment, it's just a different experience that they would get.
Wow. I mean, this was amazing. I really enjoyed talking to you guys. I really got a lot out of this. Do you guys want to tell everybody like how they can get the book and how they can follow you? And thank you so much.
Well, can I show the book? Is that all right?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So that's the book, Between Lives. And it's out now in the US on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and, bookstores. It's coming out in about on the 19th of June in Europe and the rest of the world. If you'd like to know more about me and my work, you can get me on my website, www.reenakumarasingham.com. And that's just my full name. And if you want to know the work that Andy and I do together, it's www.pioneeringnewconsciousness.com.
Wow. And thank you so much. And Andy, did you have any final words for the audience? And thank you guys so much.
Just thank everybody for giving the time to allow us to talk to you and to give my deepest love to everybody on their amazing journey.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. I really enjoyed this. And guys, I have no more shows for tonight. So to the audience, I will see you guys tomorrow. And have a good night, everybody. And thank you to Reena and Andy. And this was amazing. And